It is Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. I'm Dr. Grantham Taylor Hughes for my show, The Grantham Taylor Hughes Show, with my co-host, Lena Suzanne. Hi, Lena. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Grantham. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I always feel good when I get to the intro without any mistakes. You thought I forgot your name, right? There's almost a pregnant pause there, like
Yeah, there was a bit of hesitation, wasn't
a
there?
little bit of hesitation there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so people like my editorializing, and it's always funny, right? Because we want to have some jocularity to our call. We want to wax a little bit of comedic with this. We want people to come in easy, as they always have MCs and masters of ceremonies that come in and they want to soften up the crowd, as they say. So it's not so difficult. I don't know what that means, but that's what they usually have. They prep audiences and what have you. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about today, we've talked about the Sri Yantra in past videos, but I want to do some augmentation of that in reference to our last video. We were talking about omnivergence, and which is a combination of divergence and convergence into what I call omnivergence. And I took that from Buckminster Fuller in his book, The Critical Path, where he used the word omni all the time, so meaning universal, pretty much. So the Omnivergence Institute is learning about, there's 26 divisions. It's really the Neo-Silicon Valley. It's a new Silicon Valley because the one we had recently it didn't really follow through on some ideals. And the ideals were that they were supposed to be finding a resonant circuit and working with silicon, but they eventually caved into OPEC and the plastic world. And so now, and then they got scattered after the Cold War ended. So most of the work in the Silicon Valley is being done in Mexico because the labor is cheaper down there. So they ended the Cold War, but ironically, so everybody's knowledge here, you see how things segue into interesting things, right? Right.
Mm.
But anyway, the interesting thing is they still have 17 agencies with NATO, and they still make war toys in those agencies, but they're not making them in Silicon Valley anymore. And then they said, well, didn't they stop all that? Well, no, they didn't stop it because it's big business to make aircraft carriers and weaponry and stuff. There's a big bunch of money to be made in that whole thing. So they still do it with 17 different agencies, mostly in Europe, with the with NATO. NATO makes all these war toys. So you don't have to get nervous about it because they're not ever going to do that. Because I had a friend years ago that worked on missile silos in California and around the country. He was an engineer for NASA, a very good friend of mine. And I used to kid him about going to Atlanta and working on the silos. He said, "Don't talk about that on the phone." But he told me that those missile silos, the missiles wouldn't get out of the silos because the technology is so old and they're just decrepit pieces of junk. Because you have to understand, he was an engineer that worked on the devices to try to make them run. See, they're always in a ready position because if you don't have something on, then it goes to waste. It's kind of like if you don't have people in a house, it just falls apart. But he said that probably none of them would get out of the silos, even when they fired them. So you got to appreciate the fact that there really couldn't be any World War III anyway, because the technology really stinks.
Grantham,
Yes.
you were telling us about the Omnivergence Institute, that it has 26 divisions. So what's going to be happening there?
Well, essentially, we're trying to create a Lightspeed vehicle because nobody's studying Lightspeed because they're real nervous about that. They think that when you go Lightspeed, there's a you dial a dilation. They call it time dilation. And time dilation means you're expanding time because they have movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Flight of the Navigator. There's a bunch of movies that try to reinforce the fact that there's time dilation when you travel at warp speed. See, but there really isn't because there's no time in warp. When you're traveling 300,000 kilometers per second or faster, which is one warp, there's no expansion of time. See, I proved that in front of MIT professors years ago when I was teaching constitutional law classes at Swedenborgian College up in Pennsylvania. And they really were impressed with the fact that that when you go at a warp speed, I was showing some graphs on a chalkboard at the time. In those days, we used chalkboards. We didn't use grease boards. And I was showing these math equations and what have you. And they agreed that there might be just a few nanoseconds off from when you went from warp to coming back from warp. You see what I mean? So in other words, if you went warp speed and you came back, you'd be in the same timeline. You're not going to be in a different timeline. But they don't understand that because why don't they understand this? Scientists don't understand a lot of things, you see, and that becomes the issue because the main thing is they have to sell out for their grants. They get government grants and they can't study things extensively because they get their money from the government and they have certain criteria, grant criteria they have to follow. So they don't really get into expansive ideas because they can't, because they're getting paid. So money causes a lot of ignorance in our world, not because a person is necessarily ignorant, because they would like to expand on what they think about or expansive thoughts or just the truth, as we were talking about on our call. If they could get to these things, if they weren't stuck in the medium of exchange cycle of being caught in orthodox type thinking, and then they can't move on to something more expansive. But we're at a time right now that we need to get into some more advanced technology because we don't have advanced technology because the templates of technology we have right now are very primitive. We have a primitive society right now. And so anyway, and back to the yantra in terms of divergence and convergence, when we were talking about doing the yantra for 9 minutes, and that's we should do that every single day. That will bring a person's wealth to them. Oh, what happened? Oh, I see. That's why you brought up the yantra.
Mhm.
We suddenly disappeared on my side where now you can show we can show that Sri Yantra and we're showing this Sri Yantra. In the middle, there's a little circle there. That's called a bindu, Bindu. The bindu would be what you put your attention on. In Indian language, it's really Sanskrit language. Bindu means spirit, but you have to understand this is not really for spiritual enlightenment. This is for gaining your wealth in your life, your riches in life, your wherewithal that you need to get through physical life. This has nothing to do with some kind of enlightenment. So just remember that, because when you look at it, you can see, well, what does it have to do with enlightenment? It's just a mandala. It's an instrument we put our attention on. What does that have to do with enlightenment? Well, really nothing, but it has to do with bringing everything to you. When you look at the center of when you look at the center, everything is drawn to you. As I was saying on other videos, people that are successful have been using their eyes properly in terms of centering the eyes in the middle, and some even if they're not using the yantra. Yantra is just an instrument to help you focus your eyes so you can bring everything to you. So in reality, the only employer is yourself, and you're the employer and the employee at the same time. But they're like separate entities. So the yantra helps you to separate that duplicity that you need in your life in terms of duplication of having an employer and employee. And in reality, the yantra is the only employer that you need that will pay you. And how does it pay you? Well, you put the attention on it and you draw everything to you, ironically, see, by using your physical eyes. Now, that might sound like a lot of data and complex, but over the course of time, we'll be repeating this information to bring clarity to somebody. I don't really call it enlightenment. I call it clarity, thought clarity in reference to the understanding of what we're talking about logically. And so therefore, this practice of 9 minutes every day is very good because it's got a storied record, a track record of experience over a long period of time that people have gained a lot of wealth with. I've used it myself and have gained uh, uh, much from it. Now, excuse me. What I was wanting to talk about today was in terms of omnivergence and the yantra, you can learn how that. Remember, I was talking about that you have your two eyes mean that there's two worlds. Now, the separation of that is in a book by Peter Shealy, photo reading. Photo reading is talking about the two different um, uh, portals you have in front of you, but right now we're seeing one. Like we're looking at this yantra and we're seeing one figure. But in reality, there's two figures there, just like in our world, there's really two worlds because we have two eyes. So how do we get control of that? Well, that's why when we talk about divergence and convergence, the divergence of the yantra means you're going to separate that bindu into two, and you might be able to separate the entire yantra, which would be a good thing to do because when you do that, then there's a movement of being able to bring it back to convergence, and then you can actually move in there. There's like a physical traveling that can take place with that. And that's an old practice, but that goes beyond the 9 minutes. If you're so compelled to do more than 9 minutes, and people want to do that because they always think it's 9 minutes really isn't enough. You see, so if you want to do more, then you can do affirmations and like in the she made the neuro-linguistic programming, which is essentially just but affirmations, positive affirmations, like say I want to be rich and all these things. I want $1 million now. That type of affirmation business, which really works. And but over and above the silent viewing of the yantra, because the instructions on the yantra are to view it for 9 minutes. Just viewing, a 9 minute viewing. That's the instruction, 9 minute viewing, and nothing really else. But because man thinks, and there'll be a lot of thinking going on, and you might even have to train your eyes to see in the middle without thinking so much. And that's what it really does. It augments your attention level. All right, you can come back now because I'm going to ask you. Now, so far, how are we doing? Do you have any ideas or concepts? And so go ahead and elaborate on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for some people will print out the yantra to use it, have a piece of paper, like an A4 piece of paper, that they can kind of take anywhere with them and not be reliant on the internet and having to have a picture on a screen. But what I wanted to say was, there is a correct orientation for the picture, isn't there? Like when you have it on paper, you could end up with it any way up, but there is a correct orientation, isn't there? Is
Right,
it?
there is the middle triangle, like you have it there, that's correct. That's called the female yantra with the arrows pointing down. And that's the one that works over how long period of time. That has the track record to have the flat surface at the top of the middle triangle. That's the proper way of looking at it, the proper direction.
Yeah. And
Yes.
what I also
And
want to,
remember, 18 inches, 12 to 18 inches away from it. That should be the proper distance that you have. So it's pretty close. I mean, you can't be across the room and see it really. Okay, go ahead. You were trying to get in there.
yeah, so for the first 9 minutes, we're just observing. And then after that, if we kind of diverge, go into divergence and separate the bindu into two, what are we getting out of that? And do we look at one rather than the other, or
Okay, yeah.
yeah,
And how to do it would be if you look above the yantra at your hand per se, what will happen is there'll be a paralleling or a separation of the when you, and your peripheral vision below you. And the photo reading, the Peter Seeley was saying that if you take a book and you open up a paperback book and you put your hand above the paperback book and put your attention on the hand, what will happen is the binding in the middle, the separation line in the middle will separate. See, people have had experience of separating their physical life. Like if you look at a corner in a room, you can separate the line between the angle of the room, and you can start to separate those lines. So that's proving that there's a superimposed world in front of you. There's two worlds in front of you that are superimposed on each other. So when you move that superimposition, then you can see two things. Now in the book photo reading, he called it the blip page, and he had these perforations in the drawing, and I couldn't figure out what he meant. I had to reread it a few times to try to sort out what he was talking about. But the binding of the book in the middle will separate into two. Once it separates, it looks like a tiny little scroll. I call it the scroll page. And the same thing will happen if you're looking at the yantra, that the bindu will separate, and then what you'll see is you'll see two bindus, and that's the same practice. When you see two bindus, now what happens is that's a divergence, and you're diverging your world in front of you. When you bring it back, you if you what happens if you're in divergence and you are like visualizing something or your affirmations or what have you, if you visualize when you're in divergence, when you come back, you should be able to create what you're thinking about. See, that's how powerful the whole thing is, because we've talked about that your eyes are the creators. So when you're the creator, then you learn this methodology to create everything that you need, and gaining control of that. See, what we're teaching is gaining control of the yantra and your daily life, and getting proper wherewithal and having plenty of space to create an empire if necessary. So the idea is the divergency will help you create your empire. Or even Yantra in the 9 minutes will do it, but this is over and above that, because, like I said, people have a predilection to want to do more. They'll think that's not enough, and that will just be a standard way of thought with people. Excuse me. So that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to give you extras when you do these things. There's a lot of different utilities you can use with the yantra in order to augment your world and what you're doing. So if you have time outside of 9 minutes, then you can do what we're talking about here.
Mm.
Excuse me.
And
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention when I try to separate the um, Bindu into two, what I found I can do is imagine that the Bindu is a hole, like isn't a white Bindu, is like as if you could move through it, and I imagine um, looking through the hole into the distance, and I found when I do that, then it separates into two.
Right, it's the same thing. So you're really doing reverse peripheral vision. It's called It's the same. There was a book called Magic Eye. I thought Disney had put it out, but it was just Magic Eye. When they had these pictures with all these little colors, and you couldn't see an image in it. When you put your hand above it, you could see a picture of a ship or a face or something. It's the same principle that we're talking about with the yantra. The divergency is the same thing, where you're able to separate the two worlds that you're in that are superimposed on each other. There's a 10% separation because we are in a 360-degree orb that we're sitting in, and behind us there's a convergence of 10%. In the ancient times, and the problems with the divergency in the past was because our natural tendency, when you're looking at the yantra, it might equivocate a little bit, it might move a little bit, and therefore that means that if the bindu is kind of shaking a little bit, because your eyes are trying to separate it anyway, the natural tendency is to go divergent. But the convergency happened thousands of years ago. They realized, I'd mentioned this before about yantra, or divergency. Thousands of years ago, we were in a divergent world, and it was causing psychotic breaks, because every time you'd go into the right or left, it's like us looking at each other right now. You're on the left side and I'm on the right side. So just think about those two pictures, but they're the same picture, but there's a negative polarity in the left side, and there's a positive polarity in the right side. So what would happen was they were directing people to go into the positive side on the right side, but as soon as you went into the positive side, another negative side would open up. See, so people were very confused about the location. So it took a long time to train people to do convergence to be in one world. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
You see? So the convergence is the one world that makes it easier to negotiate than to negotiate in two worlds. Because right away, when in the old days in divergence worlds, you'd go into the right or left, and it was recommended, like I said, go into the right side, which is positive. And then as soon as you went into that picture, like moving inward, like you're moving with your eyesight. I mean, there's physical movement that does take place too, but that's another lengthy discussion, which I've touched on. We've touched on that. So let's just stay with that. Go ahead. You want to get in there? Go ahead.
So when you say in the old days people were operating within this divergent state, um, when do you mean? Like in the old days? How, like when?
Well, the person, the people with two eyes were living in a dual world there. There were two pictures because naturally you see two worlds. Like when your eyes are going straight ahead, you're going to see two worlds. But it's hard to diverge from a convergent world that you're in right now, because that's what we've been talking about is how to diverge from a convergent world, when in reality we went from divergence to convergence because divergence is a natural state. Boy, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? Anyway, but if people stay with this and repeat, they'll get this because it's really simple when you think about it. So again, excuse me, the natural state of our eyes is divergence, to see straight ahead and see two pictures. But remember, that didn't work in ancient times. So that the higher ups or the wise people of the day sorted out how to do convergence and get to one world for people that when they were conditioned, they'd see one world. When a baby's born, he's in divergence. But we don't know that, see? That's why when you look at a baby, his eyes are kind of rolling around his head because essentially he's in divergence. But the longer you talk to the baby or you whatever you're doing, they focus on you. There's bonding with the baby. The bonding. Think about the word bonding. Bonding means convergence. You're bonding the divergency. They don't understand the word bonding. Now we just brought that up. Now I'm the first person that's actually defining bonding. They don't know what that means. Well, it's a vibration between us. And there's a bond. I said, what the bonding is a convergence. When the baby has divergence when it's naturally born, so it starts to bond on the one world that your parents are in. See, so that's what you're bonding to convergence. See, so that's what was the prop. Yeah, go ahead.
So what you've said is this divergent state didn't work in the past, but is it something that's desirable for people to do now, and in the future? And do you think it can work in the future? Is this what you're getting at?
Well, because it's a methodology of bringing you wealth, but it's also just by looking convergently on the instrument, that will bring you wealth too, because it's drawing things to you. I'm just explaining to you behind all of it what's taking place. It divergence, convergence creates everything. See, because if you're looking into a convergence, you're dealing with a divergent world that's bringing things to you because your eyes are drawing things nigh. Remember, I told you I would get into discussions in a restaurant. We called them arguments, right? And then what I would do, because I was going to ignore the other person, I'd pick up a spoon or a utensil of some kind and I'd start twisting around, pick it up and put it in front of me like this. And I have a pen here, so here's a good example. So I'm looking at this pen and looking at it for a while, and studying the pen and looking at it. And then the other person goes, "Stop doing that. Everybody's going to come up to you, right?" So see that was the whole thing. By looking at something and studying it and what have you, it draws things to you. So that's proof in itself. Try it out. Go to a restaurant and pick up a spoon. They'll think you're crazy, and people will start coming up to you and wondering what you're doing. See, so that's proof. You can prove it that it works that way. But then I'm always saying, no practice comes back to you void. No discipline that you do in this world comes back void because we have cause and effect. So the practice of is you don't have to do divergence. I'm just saying that the simplicity of looking at the bindu is good enough to bring your wealth. But when you have plenty of time on your hands, when you're financially independent, you'll be interested in these extra information that we have on our videos. Our videos, we have a lot of information that nobody has. Just like we define today the bonding that we have. Nobody talks about that. I'm the first one. That might be a brand new thing that's been said that what hasn't been said in hundreds of years. So bonding is just a convergence of your eyes when a baby's born because they're in a divergent state because they have two eyes. So they got to get into the convergent world because that's what we're in now. We're in a convergent world. If you're not in a convergent world, you're considered a psychotic. You have dual personalities. What does that mean? Dual personality means you're going divergent and you don't realize it. But psychology doesn't understand that. They don't really understand much of anything because they always say you take psychology because you weren't able to study geology. You weren't smart enough. That's kind of a joke. I didn't say that to you, by the way. Hello, I'm sorry, psychologist. I didn't make that up. Anyway, it's just go ahead. Go ahead. Before I get in more trouble, right?
That's interesting what you said though about you referring to mental illness and how people are in a divergent state. Uh,
Yes, well, it could be, you see, because people get emotional about not understanding if their eyes diverge or not seeing convergence. They probably there's nobody that's really explaining what's going on. I'm explaining it, but again, if you get in an emotional state and what have you, they seek help, right? When you're having difficulties mentally and not understanding what's going on, right? But for me to explain this will help a great deal of people's attention level and their mental balance. I mean, yantra will bring balance to you because it also will bring you wealth. It'll also bring you some balance psychologically. See, because the problem with most people is they have poor attention levels. They're scattered. They call that attention deficit disorder back in the old days, and now they call ADHD hyper dissociation. And I used to call it when I was younger constant dissociation syndrome because you really couldn't understand what somebody was saying. So everybody has some form of ADD, their attention drifts and what have you. So that's like some people have difficulty in hearing what I have to say. But because I'm very connected in terms of my experience with my Lama teachers in the East, I'm very connected with what I say. I understand my own self, but other people might not understand it, you see, because their attention level is poor. So that means that the yantra will help that attention level so you can focus better. Your school studies will be better. Photo reading can help that. You see what I mean? A lot of things will be augmented. And they say, well, isn't that enlightenment? I'm not talking about enlightenment. I'm talking about mental balance, which is exoteric. It's with your eyes open world is your mental balance we're talking about. So it will bring you balance that way. But first and foremost, it'll bring you abundance and a wealth and abundance. That's the prime objective that we're talking about here is getting rich. And people want to get rich and they want to do it as easy as peasy as they can, easy peasy as I call it. And what better way to do it than to work 9 minutes, 9 minutes a day instead of 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever they're working.
So, Grantham, I think I've heard you say before that when the Bindu is split into two, uh, there's one on the right and there's one on the left, that they're actually positive and negative. Is that right? So the right is the positive polarity and the left is the negative.
Yes, we have to designate that because in science you have to have polarities in order to manifest things. So that the left side is called sinistral, or when you go counterclockwise, it's levo-rotatorially. If the right side is diacyl or positive, that means clockwise, it's spinning dextro-rotatorially. So it's all a spinning state too. So we need that to have manifestation. We have to have dark and light in order to manifest things. So it's like we're looking at you with a white background and you have your dark printed blouse on there. You can between the white and the dark, there's a contrast that creates the image. You're creating image out of the colors that we see in front of us. So that's the chiaroscuro in art is the positive and negative. So it's not really good and evil. There's no values on it. It's just the statement of the quantity of negativity and positivity. So the left side is negative and the positive is right side. So that's the long and the short of it. Correct.
Mhm. So it would make sense then if we're splitting things into the positive and negative, we have the two bindus, and then we're bringing it back together again in omnivergence. That would be sort of creating a balance of the positive and negative sides.
Correct. That's correct. That's the idea of it. And then we're giving this wealth instrument to people so they can become rich very easily instead of the struggles they have in labor and they're not making enough money and yada yada. because there'll be plenty for all in reference to this whole thing. Whatever you want will come to you. See, and there's plenty of space. There's plenty for everybody because the cosmos is pretty much unlimited. I think that's probably about it today, right?
I think so, yeah. I just wanted to ask one last thing, Grantham, and that is a lot of people going to be listening to this and saying, yeah, right, look at that picture for 9 minutes a day. What
Well,
do you
that's what I mean. That's why we got to keep reinforcing that. And that I've had the experience. So I have a person who's had the experience making millions of dollars using it. So that's good. That's a good thing. And so we're a voice of experience. We just got to keep at it, repeating. That's why we're going to be back here on Thursday, everybody. So we'll keep repeating it, reinforcing it. And I assure you, it's the truth. And people that do it, if they do it, they're going to find they're going to have some great results in their life, even if they don't agree with it. Because they always say, even if you disagree with the yantra, it works. See, that's a nice thing, isn't it? I
Mm,
always like that comment. This is just ridiculous looking at a piece of paper getting rich, because that's what you're going to think about it. But when you do it and something comes in your life, that's the experience of, oh my goodness, maybe that's how it happened. That Rolls Royce drove up in my driveway and the guy gave me the keys. How did that happen? Well, did you do yantra last night? Yes, I did.
okay. Thank you very much, Grantham.
Well, thank you. Have a great day. Everybody else have a great day too. Please, please do.
Thanks for watching, everyone. And if you enjoyed this video, please share, like, and subscribe.